I can't explain it, but I'm drawn to the kind of places that feel like the last stop before nowhere. Silent, empty, and endless. That's why in the summer of 2022, I found myself booking a remote Airbnb near an abandoned town in Death Valley, California. The goal was to capture some eerie, desolate photography. The kind of shots that make people wonder what's lurking just beyond the frame. The listing was perfect. An isolated cabin, about a 30-minute drive from the nearest gas station, surrounded by nothing but sand and rock. It had no Wi-Fi, no neighbors, just miles of emptiness in every direction. The host even described it as a place to disconnect and embrace solitude. I was all for it. But by the time I left that place, I never wanted to be alone in the desert again. The drive there was long and surreal, cutting through endless stretches of barren landscape. I passed an old, rusted sign for a ghost town, nothing more than a few crumbling buildings visible in the distance. The Airbnb cabin wasn't much further. It was small but functional, a single room, a kitchenette, and a bathroom. The front door had a keypad lock, and a note inside mentioned that there was a solar-powered security camera facing the entrance. That made me feel a little safer, knowing at least something was recording out here. That first night, I set up my camera on the porch, hoping to get some long exposure shots of the night sky. The silence was crazy. Just the whisper of wind over the sand. At around midnight, I packed up and went inside. Locked the door, triple-checked it, then I went to bed. Something woke me up a few hours later. At first, I thought it was just the heat. I had left the window open a crack, and the desert air was dry and stifling. But there was something off. A strange, heavy stillness in the room. Then I noticed the front door. It was open. Not wide open, but just enough. A dark sliver of space leading out into the night. I sat up too fast, my head swimming. I knew I had locked that door. I had checked it at least 3 times. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the opening, waiting for something to move in the doorway. Nothing did. I grabbed the pocket knife from my bag, forcing myself to breathe. Then, as quietly as I could, I walked over and pushed the door shut, locking it again. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was the wind. The lock hadn't latched all the way, maybe. That was the only logical explanation. But I knew I had locked that door. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then I remembered the security camera. Pulling out my phone, I accessed the footage through the solar-powered system. It only recorded motion-triggered clips, so I scrolled to the time I had gone to bed. At first, nothing. Hours of nothing. Then, movement. I squinted at the screen. A dark shape just outside the door. The timestamp read 2:38 a.m. I swiped to the next clip. The door was open now. My breath caught in my throat. The next clip was from 4:17 a.m., nearly 2 hours later. The man was back on the porch. He stepped outside, disappearing into the darkness beyond the camera's frame. I scrolled through the remaining footage, searching for any sign of movement inside the cabin, but the camera only covered the porch. No angles inside, no way to see what he had done for those missing 2 hours. I bolted up, suddenly needing to check everything: my bags, the cabinets, my camera gear, the fridge, the closets. Nothing was missing. Nothing was moved. It was like he had just been there, watching. I wanted to tell myself I would have woken up if he'd done anything else. but I had no idea how close he had gotten. I grabbed my stuff and threw it into my car so fast I barely remembered locking the door behind me. My only thought was getting the hell out of there. When I hit the main road, I finally called the Airbnb host. She answered, sounding groggy. Hey, I need to ask, has anyone else ever reported anything weird happening at the cabin? I asked. A long pause. What do you mean? She finally said. I checked the security footage last night. Someone was inside. Silence. Then she sighed. You should leave. I gripped the wheel tighter. Already on my way. Another pause. Then, I don't rent that place out often, she admitted. Not since the last guy. I swallowed. What last guy? More silence. Then she muttered, I thought I changed the locks, and she hung up. I didn't stop driving for hours. When I finally pulled into a gas station, I checked my phone again. The security camera feed was gone. The entire system wiped. I called the Airbnb host again. No answer. A few days later, the listing was removed. To this day, I don't know who that man was. But every once in a while, I think about those missing 2 hours of footage. The part where I was sleeping and he was watching. I've been hiking solo for years, and I've always prided myself on knowing when to trust my instincts. I do my research, plan my routes, and keep emergency contacts updated. But no amount of preparation can ready you for the moment when a normal situation takes a turn you'll never forget. It was early fall, and I was deep into a road trip through the national parks, documenting my travels for my blog. That day, I had planned a moderate 6-mile hike through Bridger-Teton National Forest, just outside of Jackson, Wyoming. The kind of trail that was challenging enough to feel rewarding but still well-marked and populated. I had my gear, trail runners, a hydration pack, a portable charger, everything I needed. The weather was perfect, crisp air and golden aspen leaves scattering along the dirt path. It was about an hour into my hike when I met him. He was leaning against a signpost at a fork in the trail, dressed in hiking gear that looked well-worn but not particularly professional. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, with shaggy brown hair and an easy smile. Heading up to the ridge? He asked as I approached. I slowed, assessing him the way I always did with strangers on the trail. His tone was casual, friendly, not overly aggressive. That's the plan, I said, keeping my voice polite but not overly engaging. He nodded. I actually work as a guide here, taking a group tomorrow, but scouting some alternate trails today. I looked around. There was no one else nearby. Nice, I said, still walking. He fell into step beside me. You ever been up here before? First time in this area. He grinned. Then you gotta check out the North Ridge. Hardly anyone goes up there, but the view is unreal. You can see all the way to the Tetons, and it's not even that far. Way better than the main trail. I paused for a moment, my gut telling me to think twice. I wasn't an idiot. I didn't take random side trails alone, and I sure as hell didn't follow strange men into the woods. But he sounded so damn casual about it. Like he really was just some friendly park guide sharing a tip. I looked at my GPS. The main trail was well marked, but if there really was another lookout point, I had to admit it was tempting. Come on, he urged, sensing my hesitation. It's not far, just half a mile that way. He gestured toward an overgrown trailhead that barely looked like a path. I hesitated. Then I made the mistake of following him. At first, it seemed fine. The trail, though narrow, was there, a faint but visible dirt path winding through the trees. He chatted as we walked, pointing out different rock formations and wildlife. I kept a few paces behind him, ready to turn back if needed. But as we went deeper, I started to notice things that didn't feel right. There were no trail markers, no footprints, no signs that anyone had been through here recently. "How often do people come this way?" I asked, trying to sound relaxed. "Not often," he said over his shoulder. "That's the beauty of it." The trees thickened, the sunlight filtering through in jagged slants. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. No distant hikers, no birdsong, just the sound of our steps on the dirt. Then I noticed something else. The smell. It was faint at first, but the farther we walked, the stronger it got. A metallic, almost sour scent that I couldn't quite place. I slowed down. My instincts were screaming now. I reached for my phone, checking my signal. That's when my phone vibrated. I looked down at the screen and felt my stomach lurch. Park alert. Do not trust unauthorized guides. There have been disappearances. "Hey, I think I'm going to head back," I said, forcing a light tone. He turned around slowly. And that's when I saw his face change. That easygoing, friendly expression, gone. In its place was something else, something calculated. "You sure?" he asked. "We're almost there." Every nerve in my body was screaming. I forced a smile. "Yeah, I just remembered I told my friend I'd check in soon. Don't want to worry her." He didn't move. The silence stretched, my pulse hammered in my ears. Then he smiled. Not a normal friendly smile, a knowing smile. "That's smart," he said, his voice disturbingly even. "You never know who you might run into out here." I took a step back. He mirrored me. That's when I knew. He wasn't going to let me leave. I turned and walked fast back toward the main trail. My legs burned, but I didn't run. Not yet. I just needed to get out of sight, get far enough away that I could put distance between us before I really took off. I looked back once. He was still standing there, watching me. And then he started walking too. Faster now. Not running, but not casual anymore. My throat tightened. I didn't wait. I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, leaping over rocks, ducking under branches. I didn't care if I tripped, didn't care about anything except getting back to the main trail. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Close. I swerved around a bend, nearly skidding on loose dirt. Where was the damn trail? Then, finally, I saw it. A bright orange trail marker just ahead. And even better, 2 hikers in the distance. I sprinted toward them, waving. "Hey! Hey!" They turned, startled. I crashed onto the trail, panting. And then, nothing. The footsteps behind me had stopped. I turned. He was gone. No sign of him. No sound of movement. One of the hikers, a guy in his 50s, asked, "Are you okay?" I struggled to breathe. "Did you see? There was a guy following me." They looked at each other, then back at me. We didn't see anyone. I reported him, gave the park rangers a full description. But they never found him. And worse, when they searched that side trail, they found something else. A makeshift camp deep in the woods. No tent, just scattered belongings, an old backpack, and a hunting knife stabbed into a tree. To this day, I don't want to think about what might have happened if I hadn't listened to my gut. and check my phone. But at least I learned this. When someone offers you a shortcut in the wilderness, never take it. Winter nights in Montana hit differently. Snow-covered roads seemed to go on forever, twisting through miles of open land. No houses, no gas stations, no sign of civilization, except for a lone mailbox here and there, marking a property hidden deep in the trees. It was the kind of setting that made you feel completely alone. And that night, I was. I had spent the weekend at a friend's cabin near Red Lodge and was heading back to Billings, a solid 2-hour drive on dark back roads. It was past midnight and the roads were empty. Just me, my car, and the sound of my tires against the icy pavement. The occasional highway sign reflected in my headlights, reminding me I still had at least 40 minutes left to go. I turned up the heat, rubbing my hands together. Then, in my rearview mirror, I saw flashing red and blue lights. A cop. I sighed, easing off the gas. I wasn't speeding. I had been extra careful because of the snow. Maybe my taillight was out. Either way, I figured I'd be polite, take my ticket, and be on my way. I flicked on my blinker and pulled onto the shoulder carefully, making sure to stay on the firmer part of the snow. The police car slowed behind me, its headlights blinding in my mirrors. But something about it seemed wrong. There was no siren, just the lights. And then I noticed something else. The car had no markings. It wasn't black and white. No police department insignia, no unit number, just a nondescript dark-colored sedan with flashing lights mounted to the top. My core tensed. I sat still, gripping the wheel, watching the silhouette inside the car. Whoever it was, they weren't in a rush to get out. Seconds stretched into a full minute. Finally, the driver's side door creaked open. A man stepped out. He was tall, bundled up in a thick winter jacket with a hat pulled low over his forehead. I squinted, trying to catch a glimpse of a badge, a name tag, anything official looking. But as he got closer, something about him felt off. His walk. Cops had a certain way they carried themselves. Purposeful, direct. This guy moved differently, like he was figuring it out as he went. A shiver crawled up my spine, and it wasn't from the cold. I reached for my glove compartment, intending to grab my registration before he even asked, but then a knock at my window. I jumped. He hadn't gone to the driver's side. He was standing at my passenger window. That was weird. I'd never seen a cop do that before. I wasn't sure if I should, so I took a breath and rolled it down just a few inches. Cold air rushed in, but I didn't care. I wanted a barrier between us. He didn't lean in, just stood there, shadowed in my headlights. License and registration. His voice was flat. I tensed. What's this about? License and registration, he repeated. I wasn't speeding. Step out of the vehicle. My stomach twisted. That wasn't normal. No explanation, no questions. Just get out. I'd rather stay in my car, I said carefully. His posture shifted slightly. He adjusted his stance, like he was bracing for something. Then he smiled. Something about that smile made my hands instinctively tighten on the wheel. Sir, I said slowly, can I see your badge? Silence. I noticed he wasn't wearing one. No name tag, no radio. His jacket was zipped all the way up to his throat, covering anything that might have identified him. Then he said something that made my heart stop. "You don't trust me?" I hit dial on my phone. I didn't even take my eyes off him. I just pressed 911 and let it ring. He watched me. Then, without another word, he turned and started walking back to his car. The dispatcher answered. 911, what's your emergency? Hi, I'm being pulled over by an unmarked police car, but where are you located? I rattled off my position, fighting to calm my breath. The dispatcher's next words made my skin crawl. We don't have any units in that area. Are you sure? We have no officers patrolling that stretch of road right now, sir. I looked up. The man was getting into his car. He shut the door, but he didn't turn on his headlights. The flashing lights on his roof turned off. Then he drove away. No rush, no panic, just easing back onto the road, disappearing into the night. I sat there, still holding the phone to my ear. Sir? The dispatcher's voice broke the silence. He just left, I said hoarsely. A pause. Did you get a license plate? I hadn't. My brain had been too scrambled, too stuck on trying to process what had just happened. I think he was pretending to be a cop, I finally said. Another pause. Then the dispatcher said, Stay where you are. I'm sending a real officer to meet you. A real sheriff's deputy showed up 15 minutes later. He took my statement, asked me to describe the car, the man, and everything that had happened. When I finished explaining, the officer exhaled sharply, rubbing his jaw like he'd heard this all before. You're lucky, he muttered. I frowned. Lucky? He nodded. Unfortunately, this isn't an uncommon occurrence. We've had reports, unmarked car, fake cop, always late at night, always on these back roads. He paused, looking at the dark stretch of highway behind me. The thing is, most people don't call us, even when they realize something is off. They second-guess themselves. They get out of the car. A slow, uneasy feeling crept through my chest. And what happens then? The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past me, toward the empty road, like he was picturing something he didn't want to say out loud. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. Let's just say you did the right thing by calling 911. If you ever get pulled over again and something feels off, keep your doors locked and call us first. I swallowed hard. I didn't need to hear the details. The warning was enough. I nodded, still shaken. I drove the rest of the way home in tense silence, every shadow on the side of the road making my stomach twist. I never saw that car again, but I still think about what would have happened if I had opened my door. And I know one thing for sure. Whoever that man was, he wasn't a cop. Driving nights in Oregon can be peaceful until it isn't. I've been a rideshare driver for about a year now, and I prefer the late-night shifts. Better tips, fewer entitled customers, and honestly, something about driving through quiet, empty roads in the dead of night felt strangely calming. There's no honking, no rush hour stress, just me, my music, and the road. That's what I thought before that night. It was just after 2 a.m., and I was heading back to Eugene after dropping off a passenger at a remote Airbnb. Tall trees framed the nearly empty road, their shadows stretching and shifting in my headlights. I had about An hour's drive left before I'd be home. I wasn't particularly tired yet, but I was looking forward to crashing in my bed. It had been a long shift. That's when I saw a woman standing right in the middle of the road. I barely had time to react. I slammed on my brakes, the tires screeching as I skidded to a halt just feet from her. My hands were locked onto the wheel, my chest tight from the sudden stop. She was illuminated perfectly in my high beams, barefoot, wearing what looked like a thin white dress that fluttered in the breeze. Her hair was long and dark, her face expressionless, lips slightly parted. But her eyes were locked on me. And then she turned and ran, without a word. No scream, no sign of distress, just bolted into the woods. I sat there for a second, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. What the hell just happened? I looked at my phone, mounted on the dashboard. No service. Of course. My hands were still gripping the wheel, the reality of what I'd just seen sinking in. Was she in danger? I faltered, caught between instinct and logic. This was rural Oregon. There were no gas stations or towns nearby, just wilderness for miles. If she was running from something, she wouldn't get far barefoot. I turned off the engine, flicking my hazard lights on. My headlights still bathed the road in harsh white light, illuminating the space where she had stood just seconds ago. The forest beyond, however, was pitch black. I cracked the door open, stepping out cautiously. The night air was crisp, filled with the distant noises of insects, and then I heard a rustling. Not deep in the woods. Close. My breath hitched as I turned my head toward the tree line, squinting into the inky blackness. The shadows between the trees seemed to shift, blending into something almost human-shaped. There was someone standing there. Not the woman. Someone else. Motionless. Watching. Dread pooled in my gut. There were two of them. One had lured me out. The other was waiting. Suddenly, the woman's behavior made sense. She hadn't been running from something. She had been leading me toward it. I took one step back toward my car. A branch snapped. The figure shifted slightly. I moved fast. I yanked my door open and threw myself inside, locking the doors in one swift motion. My hands fumbled with the key, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I barely got the engine started when a knocking on my passenger window. I whipped my head around. It was her. The woman stood just outside my window, inches from the glass. I hadn't even heard her approach. Her face was still blank, her dark eyes locked onto mine. My blood ran cold. I didn't even think, I just hit the gas. The car lurched forward, tires spinning for a split second before I sped down the road, leaving her behind in my rearview mirror. But just before she disappeared into the distance, I saw it. She wasn't alone anymore. The second figure had stepped out of the woods, watching me go. I didn't let up on the gas until I reached a gas station on the edge of town. I parked under the brightest light I could find, locked my doors, and just sat there, trying to breathe. My hands were shaking. I pulled out my phone. Still no service. It took another 10 minutes before I got a single bar, just enough to call 911. The dispatcher sounded bored. Could have been someone in distress, she said. Could have been a bad prank. I told her about the second figure. She paused, then asked if I had actually seen their face. I hadn't. And somehow, that made it worse. She said they'd send a patrol car out to check. I never heard anything back. The next day, I scoured the local news. Nothing. No reports of a barefoot woman stopping cars. No arrests. No bodies found in the woods. It was like it had never happened. But I know what I saw, and I know what almost happened. Now, every time I drive through that stretch of road, I never stop. Not for stranded cars, not for waving hands, and especially not for women standing in the middle of the road. I never figured out who they were. I don't know if they were a cult, a gang, or something even worse. But I know they were organized. They knew exactly what they were doing. And if I had hesitated just a few seconds longer, I don't think I'd be telling this story. If these stories left you on edge, hit that like button, subscribe for more real horror, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Which story shook you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you've ever had a terrifying experience in an isolated place, share it. You never know who might need the warning. Share this video with someone who thinks they'd handle these situations better. Stay safe, stay aware, and trust your instincts, because out there, no one's coming to help. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.